Welcome back to Mike's Gun World. Today we're going to continue our M1 Carbine series. We're going to do part 2, the takedown of the bolt. If you remember back in part 1, if you did watch part 1, we talked a little bit about how to identify whether or not an M1 Carbine is truly from World War II, specific markings on the front and back of the receiver, and then we did a disassembly and a reassembly. And for the M1 Carbine, the disassembly, reassembly is really simple. It shouldn't really take more than a few minutes. The bolt, however, is a little bit more challenging, and you can't just take the bolt down. I know I've done a couple of different bolt takedowns, the Mosin Nagant 9130, and then I think I did the 98K. But you need a special tool to actually take the bolt apart. Now, the bolt itself is a very simple design. It's really only one part that needs to come out, that's the extractor, and then the whole bolt comes apart. However, you still need this tool. Now, it's possible to do it without this tool, but you have a good chance of really marking up your bolt pretty badly if you're trying to use a screwdriver. So, that being said, let's get to the bolt takedown. Hey, if you're liking our videos, you're liking our content, please hit like, subscribe, leave some comments down below. I try to get back to you as quickly as possible. I always do appreciate the feedback. Also, don't forget to hit the little bell so you're notified every time we drop some new content. Finally, you can follow us on Facebook at Mike's Gun World. And if you need to reach me directly, you can hit me up at mikesgunworld@gmail.com. All of your support is always appreciated. Okay, now let's get to the video. Okay, so let's get going on our bolt takedown. I got a penny here for size reference because there's a couple parts in here that are really small. I just want to use it as a reference point. Right here is your ejector, and this is under spring pressure. That's what actually throws the shell out, ejects the shell. And then this is your extractor right here, and it's under spring pressure as well. There's a spring and plunger back behind here. So that's what grabs onto your shell when a new shell is loaded into the chamber, and then the extractor actually throws a shell out like that. The challenge is, well, first of all, it's a pretty simple design. On the back of the extractor, there's a pin that actually runs all the way through the bolt to here. And the simplicity of the design is that pin holds your firing pin in place and then your extractor in place. They have to be, when we put it back together, they have to be lined up perfectly because there's little grooves in both where this pin sort of seats through and holds everything together. The other thing that we have to get out of here, and this is what the tool is for, is we've got to compress this spring and plunger right here and take the pressure off the extractor so that the extractor can come out. Now, when using the tool, you have to also be careful once the extractor comes out to really pull it out of the tool very slowly because you don't want these shooting all around your shop. I'll tell you right now, they're so small, you will never find them. Okay, so then the tool itself, it has these two little wings on it. There's one that's solid. This is for actually taking, let me make sure I get that on camera. This tang is solid, and this is for the disassembly, and then this one is forked, and that's what goes onto the plunger and pushes it back in place, and that is for the reassembly. And then inside the tool, right here is a little stud which will push on our ejector. Okay, so let's get the bolt on the tool and start taking it down. So you want to line up that stud with the ejector. And we want to make sure that we have the correct tang, the flat one, in place, and it's going to sit on top of the plunger behind the extractor. you can sort of force it into place, put a little pressure on it, and then turn the screw in to add pressure to that plunger. Just put a little pressure in there to keep it on the plunger. I don't think we have enough material on. There we go. And then we want to see that plunger. I know it's very hard to see on camera because these parts are so small, but we want to see that plunger actually being pushed back by the flat tang into the stud on the right side of the bolt. And you want to screw the bolt all the way in so the ejector is also compressed all the way in. At this point, our extractor should be loose, and it is. I think if we turn it over, it should just fall out. Yep, there it is. And that is our extractor, and this is a stud that really holds the firing pin and the ejector pin and spring together inside the bolt. So now what we want to do, and by the way, just for comparison, there it is sitting next to a penny. Now what you want to do is we're going to want to loosen this, but well, here comes our firing pin too. Our firing pin comes out. Remember, the ejector is under heavy spring pressure, and the plunger and spring here behind the extractor are under pressure. So you want to do this really slow. Take the pressure off very, very slow. Oh, man. And that plunger shot right out. And thank God it hit my hand, because that's the size of it right there. That is a plunger behind the extractor, and that's what I was talking about. You got to be so careful that you don't lose a part like that. If it did not hit me in the hand right here, I'd be searching all over the shop all day for it. So we're taking pressure off, taking pressure off, taking pressure off. The ejector feels like it's loose at this point, and it is. And our ejector comes out, and you can see there's a little notch out here. In the ejector, there's a little notch out here. So when we put it back together, that notch has to be facing at the stud over here on the right side of the bolt, because that is what the extractor slides through to hold it in place. So there is our ejector and spring, and then right over here is the actual spring that sits behind the extractor. And again, these are really tiny parts. You want to be very careful. Should actually get a metal tray out. I can't even get the spring out of there. There we go. And there's our spring and our plunger that sit behind the extractor. Now, it's important to note also on the plunger behind the extractor, it's notched. And as we put it back together, that notch also has to go in a certain direction to the right. And I drew a very crude little picture of what that thing actually looks like. So at the top of the plunger, up here at the top of the plunger, it's notched out like this, and that notch has to go to the right. So if it's not to the right, it absolutely will not go back together the way it's supposed to. So that is how you take the bolt down. That's the easy part. Now, the tough part is, let's get this thing put back together. Okay, so getting this back together, we want to get the extractor spring into the bolt, and then the plunger. Remember, it's got that sort of cutout part. It needs to be well, to my left here, but it really, a better description is it needs to be pointed to the bottom of the bolt, and it just fits on the spring there. And it is lined up. I don't know if you can see that. It is lined up toward the bottom, what would be the bottom of the bolt. The next thing we want to do is we want to get the ejector in place. Remember, this is notch 2. If you think about that stud on the extractor, we want that notch to be in that hole right there. So it's to my right. We're going to slide that in, and you should, if you look down in there, you should be able to see that it's seated correctly. All right, then the firing pin only goes in one way. It's notch 2, but it only goes in one way, and we're going to end up holding the firing pin in place once we get going. So let's get this back on the tool, and again we're going to line up the little stud there with our extractor, and then we want the tang, the split tang, to go over the extractor plunger. And we want to just start to get it in place and put a little bit of pressure on. Make sure that we can get some pressure on that plunger. And it looks like the plunger may have slipped out. So this, I'll tell you, it does take a little bit of trial and error. It's looking like the plunger slipped off the spring, and it did. So now we've got to get that back in place. It takes a great deal of patience. Let's get that back on the spring, and now it's turned in the wrong direction, so I just use my punch to slowly rotate it, and my punch became magnetized, so that's going to be difficult. No, I cannot get it on the spring. Okay, there we go. Now I have it on. And the notch is pointing in the correct direction. So we're ready to restart getting this onto the tool, get everything lined up correctly, the correct tang in place, and slowly start turning the screw so we can get pressure on both the extractor plunger right here and the ejector. Now, if we did everything right, what we want to see is this tang coming flat against the bolt here. And it looks like it's all the way in. Our ejector is all the way in. And again, looking down through the hole, we can see everything's kind of lined up, which means it will accept the extractor. So what we want to do is just drop the extractor in place, and it should go right in. And it does kind of, yep, it snapped right in place. Then slowly just back off pressure, and we can get our bolt out of the tool. There we go. Put a shell in there. Yep, it's all working correctly. That is the takedown and reassembly of an M1 Carbine bolt. I'm going to get it back in the rifle and let's dry fire it and test it. So I did want to point out something else real quick before we put the rifle back together and test our bolt. There are two great books out there on the carbine. This one, U.S. M1 Carbine Wartime Production by Craig Reish. You can get this book today on Amazon if you're interested, and it's a excellent book, and it really breaks down not only M1 Carbine but the M2 and the M1, the M1A1, the M2, and the M3 carbines. Didn't really talk much about that. The M1A1 was a paratrooper version with the folding stock. The M2 is a fully automatic version. And then the M3, the receiver was modified to accept a scope for sniper. But inside the owner's manual, there's a chart that the U.S. military put out on the disassembly, and authorized personnel for this. Now, most rifles like the 98K, the Mosin Nagant, those bolt action rifles, Lee Enfield, even the M1 Garand, most GIs were able to take them apart and completely strip them for cleaning. But they did give a chart on who should do what. And the basic field trip that we did in part one, the individual soldier can do it. But what's funny is when it comes to the bolt, the U.S. military recommended that only ordnance personnel take down the bolt. So like I said, it's not the easiest in the world. It can be done, but I couldn't imagine taking a bolt down if you were out in the field and trying to clean the bolt. You would just bring it to the armorer. So, I don't know, just a fun fact. Let's get to putting it back together. Okay, so rifle's back together. Everything's working great. We can actually test it with a 30 cal shell. Put it in the chamber. Ejecting perfect. So that is how you take down an M1 Carbine bolt and then reassemble it. If you're liking our content, you're liking our channel, please hit like, subscribe, hit that little bell so you're notified every time we drop some new content. All of your support is always very much appreciated. We will talk to you soon.